Hello, friends. I hope you're doing well today. I've got to share a funny story with you. And it's not that funny to me right now, but I sneezed. Ouch, it hurts when I laugh. I sneezed about an hour ago, and I pulled something right here in my side. And every time I laugh or every time I cough, it really, really hurts. Is this what it's like getting old? I don't know, but this is not cool. It really, really hurts. So if I wince or I pass out over here, I'm okay. I sneezed. It's an old sneeze in my back right there. So I had this massive insight recently that I want to share with you. And I'm reading right now in a book club or a mastermind, which sounds less nerdy to me, this book, The 21 Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. And I'll give you a little backstory. This year in the book club, we're going through some Brene Brown books and John Maxwell books. And so at the beginning of the year, I said, here's the books we're going to go through this year. Make sure that you buy them and have them in time for the book club on them. And so it came time to start reading John Maxwell's this book, The Laws of Leadership. And I thought for sure I had the book. I went to go look on, I have like 3 or 4 different bookshelves of books, and I could not find it anywhere. And I looked twice, and what I realized was I don't have this book on the laws of leadership. I was sure that I did. The fact of the matter was, here's the myth that I've believed for a very long time without realizing that I was believing it, is that personal growth is leadership. Now, personal growth and leadership are intertwined, and I think good leadership is predicated on personal growth. But what I thought was I had confused this book, the leadership book, with another book that I had read by John Maxwell, which was The Laws of Growth, of personal growth. And as I'm reading this book, I had convinced myself that I had read this book before. I hadn't read this book before. What I thought before, what I'd seen before, was that personal growth was leadership. And so the fact that I am invested in personal growth, the fact that I am reading books on personal growth and talking to people about personal growth and coaching people on personal growth, in my mind, that was the same thing as becoming a better leader. And what I'm realizing as I'm reading this and going, oh, that's why that didn't work when I tried leading that group in that way. Oh, that's why that didn't work when I did that or said that or did those things. I thought personal growth was leadership. Now, I can be a better leader because I'm growing personally, but if I'm not, what I'm seeing for me is that if I'm not specifically invested in leadership, the amount of leadership growth I'm experiencing is quite limited if I'm just focused on the personal growth individually. And it's been quite an insight for me because I was convinced that I was becoming a better leader. I was maximizing my leadership potential because I was growing personally, and of course the two are intertwined. But I wasn't focused on specifically growing in my leadership. And I assume if I just grow personally, then I'll grow in leadership. And so what I'm realizing now is, if I want to become a better leader, which I do, that's part of my mission, is to elevate people to live in such a way that they hear, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant," when they get to heaven. And to do that, to the best that I can, I need to be the best leader that I can. And just simply focusing on personal growth doesn't give me the potential of leadership that I thought it was. In chapter 2 of the book, he talks about the myths of leadership. And I think this is really interesting because one of the myths that I bought into big time in the past, even still sometimes sinks in, is the education myth. That the more you know, the better the leader you are. And so I have valued information as the trump card. And I've said before, I lived with this mantra, which I didn't know I was living with, that said, if I can't get you to like me, at least I'll let you know that I'm smarter than you. Now, am I actually smarter than you? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But what I told myself in the past is that I was smarter than you, and that was a trump card. And I made sure that in my mind I was using that trump card. And I'm seeing a remnant of that myth is that I was holding on to the personal growth, the gathering of information for personal growth, the gathering of experiences for personal growth was the same thing as growing in leadership. And that's not true. Personal growth is not the same thing as growing in leadership. And I see that now. I'm so thankful that I see that now. But it was really interesting when I was convinced I had read this book before. I was convinced I had this book because I had the book and I had read the book on personal growth. And the two are different, connected and different. That's been a big insight for me in the last week or so. And then I got a couple more minutes here. I wanted to read something to you from James Clear. James Clear is the author of Atomic Habits. And if you're not familiar with that book, it's a fantastic book. It's about creating good habits that stick. Not just from focusing on the habits, but focusing on the identity of the person who does the habits. It all begins with how we see ourselves. It all begins with what we believe about ourselves. He sends out a newsletter once or twice a week, and this quote was in his last letter, and I think it's one of his quotes. It really spoke to me. Many people won't attempt something unless they can find an example of someone else who is already doing it. Rely on this type of thinking too much and you'll never do anything interesting. Your path through life is unique. It is important to extract lessons from the experiences of others, but you can't wait for a perfect example to take action. You are the example. And it's really interesting. It really spoke to me because most of my life, because I was running from failure most of my life, I needed to find an example of somebody who had done something to prove that that's successful, and then I could copy exactly what they did to make sure I was successful in doing it. Rely on this thinking too much, he says, and you'll never do anything interesting. I resonate with that. I mean, there were things in my life in the past that I would have done that were very interesting, but I couldn't find an example of somebody who had done them successfully, or done them in a way that I wanted to be seen as, and therefore I didn't do it. I didn't try it. And I realized this in the past in different words, my words, not James Clear's words, is that if I could get someone else, if I get one person to approve of me doing something, I would do it. A silly little example is one time at work, in Georgia, the days go, like this morning it was like 45 degrees outside, and now it's going to be 85 by this afternoon. And the AC and heat in office buildings just can't figure out what to do with that fluctuation in temperatures. And so it was one of these days several years ago, probably 4 years ago, and the AC was just not keeping up, and it was hot in the office. And I must have had a heavier long sleeve shirt on. And this idea popped in my head. I'm going to take my shirt off because I had an undershirt underneath and just wear my undershirt in the office. It was a casual environment. And I wouldn't do it unless I could get someone else to say, yeah, that'd be okay if you did that. And as soon as I found someone else, is my friend Kent, to say, yeah, you should do that. That'd be okay to do that. I was like, bam, my shirt's off. I'm just wearing my undershirt in the office. But that was a microcosm of how I lived my entire life. Was I wouldn't do something unless I found somebody else who was either doing it or somebody else who would back me up to do it. And so what I'm focusing on right now in my life is learning lessons from others and not waiting for the perfect example of someone to go after what I want. There are several people in my life that I know of who are living in such a way that they're being faithful with what God has given them. They're living in such a way that I believe they're going to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant, when they get to heaven. And I'm doing things in slightly a different way than they are. I'm doing things that are unique and authentic to me. Authenticity begins with imitation, but authenticity doesn't happen if it's only imitation. And so, for example, one of the things I'm really excited about that I get to do this year is I speak at an addiction recovery home that is run in coordination with my church. I speak there every week. Nobody else is doing that the way that I'm doing it. There was no example of someone who's doing it before. And it's one of the highlights of my week is that I get to go spend this time with 20 of those guys who are making a difference from the lives they lived in their past, because they see the possibility of being sober. They see the possibility of being clean. They see the possibility of making an impact in the lives they used to live and the people who used to live those lives with them. That's an example of something that I'm doing because there was no example of somebody doing it. I want to keep on doing those things. I want to keep on doing the things that are interesting to me, even if I can't find an example of somebody doing it. When I run from failure, I don't do interesting things because I have to make sure that they succeed. I have to find an example of somebody else is doing them and copy that. And that's not authentic to me. Being inauthentic is a recipe guaranteed for being stuck. Still on James Clear's newsletter, and I'll post a link to James Clear's newsletter in the comments today. He ends his newsletter with a question, and it's always a thought-provoking question. Here's a question from the last one, and it really resonates with me. I have three kids. They're in 5th, 4th, and 2nd grade right now. We have a foster daughter who is in daycare, who's 18 months old. But the question is, what is one important lesson for life that isn't taught in school, but you would like to teach your kids? And I thought about this for just briefly before I came on this video. I think one thing that I would love my kids to know is that knowledge isn't the be-all and end-all. That knowing things is important, but experiencing things, taking risks, doing things that we don't know, trying things, experimenting, is really what makes life interesting and authentic and memorable and significant, is doing things that haven't been done before, doing things in a way they haven't been done before. Our kids spend, the first 18 years of their lives being taught, and this isn't wrong, but being taught repeatedly that knowing the answer for a test is success. And I got really good at knowing how to take tests in high school. I got really good at knowing how to take tests in college. I did really well in school. I was a good test taker. I could figure out the multiple choice questions and which one might be right, even if I didn't know the answer. I was a good test taker. But was I a good experimenter in life? I think it took me probably a good 10 years after college to realize that life is not just about knowing the answers on a test. It's about leaning into the edge of vulnerability. It's about leaning into the edge of things that we don't know the answer to. And I want my kids to experiment. I want my kids to know that failure is okay. I want my kids to know that trying things and not knowing what's on the other side of trying this is okay. I want them to do things that might result in them falling on their face, because I want to be there to help them get back up. But I want them to experience what life is like, not because I want them to fall on their face and get hurt, but because I want them to experience life before life experiences them, if you understand what I mean. Sometimes my kids will ask me questions, and I know the answer, and I don't want to give them the answer. I don't give them the answer. I walk them through the process of figuring out the answer on their own, because I want them to learn how to learn. I want them to learn how to experiment. I want them to learn how to try. I want them to learn how to do something and be okay if they don't know the answer. Because oftentimes for me, the answer is not the goal. Getting to the answer is the goal. The destination is not the goal. The journey of getting to the destination is the goal. And I want my kids to learn that. And that's not taught in schools very prolifically. One of the conversations we have with our kids very often is that grades aren't everything. I'd love for my kids to get straight A's. Who wouldn't? I think who wouldn't want their kids to get straight A's? But what does an A mean? An A simply means that you know the answers on the test. And maybe for some kids, and maybe for some of my kids, getting an A on everything is not the goal. There are some subjects that they're going to get a B in, and I want them to be okay with getting a B. I want them to be okay with not always being the best. Because we're not going to be the best in every situation. I'm not going to be the best in every situation. If I try to be the best in every situation, well, let's see what's the result of that. The result of that is that it's an illusion. I can't be the best at everything. It's insanity to think that I could be the best in everything. I want my kids to be in rooms where they're not the smartest person in the room. I want my kids to be in the room where they're not the most interesting person in the room. That's what life is. Life is learning from others. Life is experiencing things from others. I want my kids to be okay with doing their best and getting a B, if that's what it is. I want my kids to be able to see, going back to the quote from James Clear before, that attempting something that you haven't seen somebody do before is okay. That's the way life should be lived. That's what I think my kids should learn. That really, really hurt. If you didn't catch it at the beginning of this live, I sneezed. This is horrible. I sneezed about an hour and a half ago, and I pulled something right here in my side, and it really hurts when I cough. So the question is, this is the question I'd love to hear from you, just to share. What is one important lesson for life that isn't taught in school, but you want to teach your kids? We'll talk later. Bye-bye.